I'm Aiden Buford, and I'm going to be teaching you how to make a map. But Aiden, I hear you ask, no, demand. Why would I ever want to make a map? And the answer to that question is that you won't. But I'm going to teach you how to anyway, so sit back, relax, and let's get this thing started. First things first, we're going to choose a program. MS Paint won't work because it doesn't have the layers or a lot of the other tools we're going to be using in this. So, judging from everything that's on screen, I think you can guess what I use, and that is paint.net. It's free online, it's pretty simple to use, so that's what we're going to be using. So just download it, open it, and we can get started. We've got to decide what we're going to be using to draw the map. Personally, I prefer to use a drawing pen tablet for the computer. However, if you don't have one, then a mouse works just as well. It might just be a little bit harder to make the map look natural. Here's our start. Right now, it's kind of just a blank white page. It's pretty boring. It's not really much of a map. And to be honest, I would not want to live here. So, what we're going to do first is get some water. To do this, first you got to get a color, of course. Get a nice color for water. Then just go over to the paint bucket and drop some paint in there. And that is a god-awful color for water. 1 second. Nope. Nope. That's not even close. So let's go with something like that. That's good. Alright. There we go. We have our ocean. We can get started with the rest of the map. So presumably, you aren't wanting to make a map of the real world, because that's even more boring than the blank canvas. I mean, what are you going to do? There's already like 5 billion of them. So to begin with, we're going to be making our continents. I'll show a few ways to get started with that because it can be a bit frustrating to make it aesthetically pleasing when you're first starting out with mapping. Step of this, we'll be adding a new layer to the map. You're going to want to make a different layer for each element because if you screw something up and you have layers, you can easily edit it, whereas if you don't have layers, you're erasing the entire map rather than just one portion. So all you do is you go down to this area right here, click Add New Layer, and then we're just gonna go and rename this to Continents. And don't mess with any of the other settings, and there you go. Now that we have our ocean layer and our continents layer, we gotta put some continents in. So to do this I have two main methods, the first of which I call the random image approach. Basically, you just take a random image like say this frying pan right here, and then just plop it right on into the drawing like that. Then resize it, maybe warp it around a little bit, maybe spin it, and then hit enter and leave it there. Now obviously, this isn't the end of the method because you aren't just going to have a frying pan as a continent. However, I'm going to do the next method first, then I'll move on with both of them together. Method is the random drawing approach. It's very similar to the random image approach, except instead of an image, you're just going to draw. So I'm going to go to this paintbrush right here, then bump up the brush size a little bit, and then I'm just going to turn on my drawing pen right here, and I should probably actually, make it so I can see in the color that's not just the same color as the ocean. But then we're just going to draw a happy little continent right there. Or, in this case, it looks like a really crappy car. But anyway, that's not the point. So, these are going to be our two continents. Oh, now we have our two continents, and we're going to move on to the next step, which is, we're going to go to Properties of the Layer, and we're going to turn the opacity down, like that. Right? So, then we're going to make a new layer, and we're going to title it Continents Final. Okay? So, now that we have this, we're going to be trying to refine the borders and make them look like actual continents rather than just a really lumpy car and a frying pan. To do this, we're going to be bumping our brush size back down to something reasonable, like 1 maybe. Yeah, that sounds good. Then we're just going to zoom in, right? Then we're just going to take the pen. We are going to start tracing around the borders, and we're not going to follow them exactly. We're just going to follow them as a reference. And then we can make little outcroppings for peninsulas whenever we want. And then basically you just repeat this around the whole image I'm not gonna do like a little time lapse of it, and I'm not gonna make you sit through the entire boring process. So I'll just cut to when I'm done, but you do this with both the random drawing and the random image approaches. I went ahead and traced the outlines of the two shapes, and they're pretty much ready now, but I think that some people might be curious about why I wouldn't just draw the shapes straight out instead of going through the process of making the little car and the frying pan. So basically, what I learned early on is that drawing natural shapes is hard. If you're too far out and you're trying to draw a continent, like so if I were to go like that, it's hard to make it look natural when you're so far out, right? However, at the same time, if you zoom pretty far in, then it turns into like you don't know how big the continent that you're making is because you're so focused on the small details, and then before too long you realize, oh, I am right next to my other continent. So, what I learned early on is that it's much easier if you have a reference shape that you can base it off of so you know the size, but you can still work around that. So, gonna clear the... Whoa, did not want to clear that. So, now that we have our two continents, what we're going to be doing is hiding the first layer of continents so we can take a look at them and look at those. So here you're going to want to do any cleanup, like for example right here I seem to have screwed up, so I'm going to erase that right there. And then you just do that cleanup and then you're ready to move on to the next part. Now that it's all cleaned up, what you're going to want to do is do any like small, like finer details. Like for example, say I want to have a inland sea here. Should probably not have an eraser when I'm trying to draw, but say I want to have like an inland sea right here. So I just go in and make that. And then I want to have a few, I want to have like a little lake right there, right? And then since this is the frying pan, we gotta have another, like, we have an egg, right, in the frying pan. And there's a little island. So there. So that's like, adds some finer details like islands, seas, little lakes, stuff like that, that you don't want to do when you're actually making the continent itself. Next up, what we're gonna want to do is we're gonna make another layer here, right, and we're gonna name this one terrain. So, what we do, we just go to the paint bucket again, and then we pick out a nice color for the terrain itself. So, it can be, like, if you're trying to make it look more realistic, it can be like a little greenish colored, or if you're just trying to make an atlas type map, you can just go to a gray or whatever. And so what you're going to want to do is turn sampling to image so that it looks at the whole image when it's adjusting the paint bucket and not just the layer on. And then you're just going to fill the different parts in like that. Okay. So there we have our little land masses, and then what we're going to do is we're going to move the terrain layer behind the continents so that the borders are more visible. Okay. Now that we have our continents, we're going to start adding the nations. So basically, what you want to do is zoom in, and if you have an idea for a nation that you really want to put in, then first you're going to put that in, right? So say I want to have a Roman Empire-like nation right here. So I first draw the nation, like I'm about to cut to. Now that I have the big empire drawn out, I would move on to like the details that would be in it. So say that there's a small state within the empire that's somewhat autonomous, so I would go in and draw that out. And basically just start with the more important stuff and then move on to the less important stuff. Like the most important nation up on the frying pan would probably be the egg. So just make that a nation, right? And then that's a nation, so what would go with an egg? Well, there would be the bacon nation. And then you would draw that. And just move on until you've gone through all the important nations, and then after that you spin off into the less important ones. The magic of editing! All the nations are now on the map. So, what we want to do next is make yet another new layer. And this one we're going to name Colors. This will be the national colors for each of the nations that we've already drawn. So, personally, what I like to do is turn down the opacity on this a little bit so that the colors aren't quite as harsh. That's personal preference though, and if you don't like it, then do what you want. But so basically, you just go, and then if there's a nation that, like, again, you're focusing on, like for our little Roman wannabe right here, then you might want to choose a symbolic color for it. So, for example, if I was drawing the US, I might choose like red, white, or blue, and for the Rome here, we're going to choose purple, as that's the color of the emperors. So, again, make sure sampling is on image, not layer, and I screwed something up. Hold up. Okay, so it turns out what happens was I had my tolerance on too high, and that basically judges what's line in the image and what's not. So I'm going to turn that down, and then I can actually fill in the nations like I wanted. So the Roman Empire thing is going to have purple because, like I already said. And then then for another example, we could go to the client state of it, this. You don't want it to be the same color because that could get confusing, but maybe just edit it like a little bit, and then you could convey that, hey, these two nations are related. So I'm going to go on through the other states, and then I'll meet back with you. Having colored all the nations and made the colors a little bit more transparent as well, we can move on to actually naming the nations. So this is a bit closer to world building than it is to cartography, but it would be kind of silly to just make a map and not have any names, so we're going to do it anyway. So first off, surprise surprise, the first step is making a new layer, which we're going to be titling Names.